At 64, George Clooney finally reveals why he refused to marry for decades. George Clooney swore he'd never marry again, and for 21 years, he didn't. After a painful divorce in 1993, he told Barbara Walters, "I wasn't good at it." He dodged proposals, rejected commitment, and laughed off rumors. But at 64, the truth finally slipped out. And what really kept him from marrying all those years wasn't what anyone thought. Chapter 1. Was it all just an act? Before Amal, before the Venice wedding, before the twins and humanitarian awards, George Clooney was a man hiding in plain sight. In 1989, he eloped to Las Vegas with actress Talia Balsam. Their marriage barely lasted 4 years, and when it ended in 1993, it left more than just emotional bruises. "I probably definitely wasn't someone who should have been married," Clooney later admitted. It wasn't a bitter divorce. It was a quiet unraveling made worse by what Clooney was going through behind the scenes. He told Vanity Fair that his health collapsed. A bleeding ulcer nearly hospitalized him. He was sick, exhausted, and, by his own words, lost. But instead of retreating from the spotlight, he did the opposite. He leaned in. From his breakout role on ER to leading billion-dollar franchises like Ocean's 11, Clooney became Hollywood's ultimate bachelor fantasy. Cool, charming, untouchable, the kind of man who made women swoon and men want to be him. But underneath the tailored suits and tequila endorsements was a man terrified of repeating history. He wasn't just avoiding marriage, he was protecting himself from it. Throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, Clooney dated A-lister after A-lister, Kelly Preston, but notice something strange? None of those relationships ended in scandal. There were no tabloids screaming about cheating, no messy public fights, no dramatic breakups, just a quiet fade out every time things got serious. And that's what made people start to wonder, why did every girlfriend leave without a word? Why did no one ever accuse him of leading them on? Was it really about staying single? Or was there a deeper wound Clooney never talked about? Because here's the thing, after his divorce, Clooney didn't just avoid love, he actively rejected it. In 1995, he told Barbara Walters on national TV, "I won't marry again," and he meant it. He even made bets with Michelle Pfeiffer and Nicole Kidman, $10,000 that he'd never have children. When he turned 40, they mailed him the checks. Clooney sent them back and doubled down, double or nothing. No kids by 50. It became a running joke in the industry. George Clooney doesn't settle down. He flies solo, but the people closest to him knew that wasn't the full truth. There were rumors that his heartbreak from Talia had never healed, that his career obsession was a shield, that the playful bachelor image was just that, an image. And here's the part no one talks about. Behind closed doors, Clooney was deeply self-critical. He often blamed himself for the failure of his marriage. He once said, "I didn't give Talia a fair shot." That guilt stayed with him. So while the world saw a man who had it all, Clooney was quietly wondering if he was the problem. And that's why every relationship, no matter how passionate, ended before it could get too real. Because the truth is, he wasn't avoiding marriage, he was running from it. And what no one realized at the time is that the most eligible bachelor in Hollywood was also one of the loneliest. But buried under all the headlines was a secret only a few insiders knew. And that secret was about to be shattered by a woman he never saw coming. This story took hours of deep research to uncover. If you found it interesting, make sure to subscribe so I can keep delivering more just like it. Chapter 2. He swore off marriage. But why? Now we start peeling back the layers. After his divorce from Talia Balsam, George Clooney wasn't just cautious about love, he became almost hostile toward the idea of ever settling down again. He made headlines for saying he'd never marry, but it wasn't just talk. In a bold move that raised eyebrows even among his closest friends, Clooney placed real money on it. He bet Michelle Pfeiffer and Nicole Kidman that he'd never have children. Each of them wagered $10,000 he'd be a father before 40. When he turned 40 childless, they mailed him the checks. He sent them back and doubled the bet. Double or nothing, he joked. No kids by 50. But this wasn't just a playboy being cheeky, it was deeper. This was a man trying to prove something to the world, to his peers, and maybe to himself. In interviews, he stuck to the same script. "I like being alone. I like waking up and doing what I want." But sources close to Clooney paint a different picture. According to multiple insiders, George had a very specific pattern when it came to women, and it always ended the same. He'd fall hard, then vanish. One ex allegedly told a friend, "He shuts down the moment you talk about the future." The switch flips and he's gone. Even with women he was visibly close to, like Lisa Snowden, who he dated on and off for 5 years, or Stacy Keibler, who many thought might finally be the one, it never went beyond the surface. No engagement, no moving in, no plans, just quiet exits. So, what was really driving this fear? There was another layer people didn't see: health. Throughout his life, George battled physical pain that very few knew about. He suffered from bleeding ulcers during his first marriage, which worsened during the divorce. He endured chronic back injuries, even requiring surgery after an accident while filming Syriana in 2005. The pain was so intense he admitted it led to thoughts of suicide. "I was in a dark place. I wasn't whole," Clooney said in an interview. "I was afraid the pain would never go away." He also revealed he suffered from Bell's palsy as a teen, a condition that temporarily paralyzed half of his face and left behind insecurities he never fully shook. So maybe he avoided marriage, not because he didn't believe in love, but because he didn't think he deserved it. He couldn't imagine someone choosing to stay with him through that kind of pain. He couldn't picture a future where he was physically or emotionally dependable. And so, rather than risk hurting someone else or being exposed as vulnerable, he leaned into the playboy persona, the bachelor act, the tequila mogul, the guy who never needed anyone. But that wasn't the real George Clooney. That was a version of him shaped by fear, failure, and physical scars. And even that wasn't the full story, because just when it seemed like he'd successfully built a life without commitment, someone came along and cracked the armor. What happened next changed everything. Chapter 3, one email changed his life forever. It wasn't a red carpet event, it wasn't a movie set, it wasn't even planned. In 2013, Amal Alamuddin walked into George Clooney's life without fanfare, literally. A mutual friend asked if he could bring a guest to dinner at George's villa on Lake Como. George said yes, not realizing the woman about to walk through his door would dismantle everything he thought he knew about love. She wasn't Hollywood, she wasn't starstruck, she wasn't even trying to impress him. And George, he noticed. He later joked, "My agent called and said, 'You're gonna marry her.' I laughed. But he was right. That night, something strange happened. They didn't flirt. They didn't trade compliments. They talked for hours. She told him about her work representing war crime victims at The Hague, defending human rights activists, fighting governments and systems he'd only ever read about in newspapers. Clooney was stunned. She was smarter than anyone I'd ever met. At the end of the night, Amal took a few photos at the villa. She offered to send them to him. That's how it started. One email, then another. Then days without talking felt strange. Then they couldn't stop. They were writing essays to each other, discussing politics, justice, books, memories, and every line brought George deeper into something he didn't recognize: emotional safety. There was no performance, no pressure, just presence, and it terrified him. Months later, they finally went on an actual date while George was in London overseeing music for the Monuments Men. Amal met him at Abbey Road Studios, and they went out to dinner afterward. It should have been a disaster. The paparazzi swarmed, dozens of flashbulbs, shouted questions, but Amal didn't flinch. She smiled. She held her ground. She owned the moment. George later said, "She wasn't intimidated. She challenged me. I was falling, and I didn't know how to stop." He wasn't used to this. Women usually admired him. Amal debated him. She didn't need him. She had her own world, her own mission, her own rhythm. And for the first time in over 20 years, George Clooney didn't feel like he had to lead. He started thinking in long term for the first time since his failed marriage. But there was one thing still lurking beneath the surface: his past. What fans didn't know was that Clooney was still quietly battling the emotional residue of trauma, the chronic pain, the regrets, the fear that his past would come back and poison anything good. He had lost people. He had failed at love. He had built his life around not needing anyone. And here was a woman who somehow made all of that feel like a lie. And Amal, she didn't run. She didn't shrink. She didn't sugarcoat. She saw the mess and stayed anyway. That's when everything changed. But if you think that's when the fairy tale kicked in, just wait. Because what happened next, behind closed doors, would be the moment George Clooney could never take back. And the way Amal responded stunned even his closest friends. Chapter 4, she froze when he proposed. April 2014. After months of long-distance calls, emotional letters, and undeniable chemistry, George Clooney decided to do something he hadn't done in over 20 years. He was going to propose. He planned everything down to the last second. He made pasta from scratch Amal's favorite, lit candles, played a hand-picked playlist featuring songs by his late aunt, Rosemary Clooney. He didn't want glitz. He wanted intimacy, intention. "I had a playlist ready. I cooked. Everything was perfect," he recalled. The ring, hidden in a drawer, the cue. He asked Amal to fetch the candle lighter. She opened the drawer and froze. I was down on one knee for 20 minutes, George later said. She just kept saying, "Oh my God, oh my God." She wasn't expecting it. There had been no previous talk of marriage, no hints, no pressure. For 20 minutes, she stared, stunned, speechless. Eventually she said yes, but it wasn't instant, and it wasn't simple, because Amal had also sworn off marriage. In interviews, she later revealed, "I was 35 and resigned to being a spinster." Her world wasn't Hollywood, it was The Hague, Lebanon, war tribunals, the United Nations. In her world, marriage wasn't empowering, it was often seen as a liability, a distraction. Some of her legal peers even warned her, "Don't become a Hollywood wife, it will ruin your reputation." This wasn't just about saying yes to a man, it was about everything else that came with him: the scrutiny, the fame, the tabloid circus, the assumptions. But something about George broke through all of that. She saw the man behind the movie star, a man who had failed in love, feared commitment, struggled with trauma, and was finally ready to try again. She said yes, but it wasn't just a yes to love, it was a yes to risk, a yes to stepping into a world that would judge her, a yes to building something with someone still haunted by his past. Just months later, they were married in Venice, a private ceremony, with the whole world watching. Guests included Matt Damon, Bono, Cindy Crawford, Emily Blunt, and more. The press followed them through canals. Paparazzi lined the streets. It was beautiful, cinematic, legendary. But what the public didn't see was the fear George had in his heart. "I wasn't sure I deserved this," he later admitted. "I kept thinking, what if I screw it up again?" Because Amal wasn't marrying a perfect man. She was marrying someone still uncertain if he could ever be the partner he wanted to be. And yet, she believed in him. That belief changed him more than fame ever could. But some insiders say this wasn't even the darkest secret they kept. Because what came after the wedding, what happened in the quiet, in the shadows, in the near-death moments would shake Clooney to his core and make him confront a fear even greater than losing love, the fear of never seeing his children again. Chapter 5, What He Admitted at 64. Now, decades later, at 64 years old, George Clooney finally broke his silence. "I didn't know how empty my life was until I met her." In a revealing interview with GQ, he reflected on the decades he spent running from love, dodging commitment, and laughing off the idea of fatherhood. "I wasn't looking to be a husband or a dad," he admitted. "I thought I was content. Turns out I was just safe." Now he and Amal share a home, a purpose, and two children twins, Ella and Alexander. George often jokes about the kids speaking Italian behind his back. They talk to each other in Italian, and I have no idea what's going on, but behind the humor is something raw, something he only began speaking about after a brush with death. In 2018, Clooney was thrown from his motorcycle in Italy. He went airborne and slammed into a car. "When I crashed, the only thing I thought was, I might never see my kids again." That moment changed everything. Fatherhood, he says, has made him more vulnerable than ever, more present, more intentional, and more emotional. He also claims that he and Amal have never had a fight in over a decade of marriage. It's just communication, mutual respect, and a lot of laughing. But still, as questions linger, why have none of his exes spoken publicly against him? Why does he keep handwritten journals in a locked safe, according to one former assistant? And what about those letters Amal once found tucked secretly into her handbag? If even half of that is true, it changes everything we thought we knew about George Clooney. If this story changed how you see George Clooney, wait until you hear what another Hollywood legend kept hidden for decades. Click on the next video now, because the secrets that shaped your favorite stars aren't just surprising, they rewrite everything. Hit play before the truth disappears again.